Welcome. I am Beth Ann Slater, and I am honored to be here with you speaking about ABAR work in all levels of school governance. As we begin our work with our school's governance structures, we must first look closely at ourselves. What have we been paying attention to in our lives? What have we been made aware of in these times that you are now paying attention to daily? Tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. As we look deeply at our own identities and learn from within what lenses we are using and what obstacles we need to remove to honestly work on the action for equity in our schools, I invite each of you to this brave space. May it be the beginning of your growth in equity and ABAR work within yourself and within your institution. May the creation of this brave space be an example of how you might lead in your life and in your role with your school beginning today. An Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa. If each of us would only sweep our own doorstep, the whole world would be clean. I do not hear this saying that if we all just took care of ourselves, everything and everyone would take care of themselves. I rather hear this as saying that it is only after we honestly clean our own house, our own actions of bias and racist behavior, as well as all the behaviors we hold that divide instead of unite, are we ready to begin the work of anti-racist behavior and work to be the anti-racist leader in our schools in the way we must. Let's listen to the danger of a single story as we think about where we might begin our sweeping.
So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. A single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. So that is how to create.
Maria Montessori shared many years ago how humanity had created one single nation. In this reality, we have to be careful that we are not also creating a single story. For although we are one humanity linked, as Montessori shared, Each individual has his or her own unique story, and the ability to live that story with dignity and without obstruction is what we are charged to make certain of in our work today. When you acknowledge the biases you have and the lenses you are using, it offers you the opportunity to carry the load in a way that will not break you, but might actually build you up. It is also through our self-reflections that we can learn to see if we have created single stories of other people as well. This is how we can begin to ask ourselves these essential questions. When we look at these questions for this conversation, I'll ask that we now begin to reflect on them in relation to our own school governance and practices. How do we look at equity? How do I provide opportunities for all people in my life? What can I commit to today that will help us support this work in our schools? Sharon Rad and Aaron Macy, in their work called Equity by Design, remind us that the only way to begin this hard work and to sustain it from here on is to look at all the aspects from as many different perspectives as possible. In voices at the table heard equally, when all of them are heard equally, we make the table a vibrant, fulfilling experience where all leave nourished. We must consider what James Baldwin said. What speech might not be within the bounds of reflective and respectful discourse? As we support our faculty and our boards as we begin this work. What is your choice? You are either choosing to do the work of becoming actively anti-racist and confronting the inherent anti-Blackness in education, or you are choosing to sustain it. My personal will. The will is the capacity to choose. We exercise this choice when we make a decision, when we exercise restraint, and when we persevere. It requires our will to make the observations of our systems, discuss and reflect on how the equity is supported and the way is made clear for equity. And then the will is also required to take the actions to make necessary changes in our systems, the ones that are needed to stay true to our anti-biased, anti-racist commitment in our school cultures. Elizabeth Kleinrock shares that to fully embrace ABAR education, schools must be willing to dive deep into their culture, policies, curriculum, and the individual mindsets of all the stakeholders. If you are truly dedicated to anti-racism, are you willing to go and let loose of some of the members in the community that are working against these goals? Will you persevere? Moving into a new mindset. It requires our will to make the observations of our systems, It requires our will to stay true. As board members and heads of school, we form our school's rules. We need to stay true. What lens are we looking through to establish these? What reflections are we making to grow our lens? What hard questions are we asking ourselves? Where do we begin? The path to racial equity, that's what we're on. What do you need to do to change? What does your institution need to do to change? Paul Gorski says that by considering the detours and principles discussed, we can find ways to strengthen our equity efforts and create schools that deliver on the basic ideals of equity and justice. A good place to start, policy handbooks. What do your policies say about your actions, about your institution? Beginning the action for equity together, the actions we take today after we have finished our own personal work, or at least began it, are what we will begin to lay out now. Sherry Bishop says, the one thing that is important to look at is, are there gatekeepers that keep people out of your school? These gatekeepers are not real people most often. They are based in policies and routines that maybe you never even reflected on in the past. They are like, and may have always been in the culture of the school. For example, the school hours, transportation, or even community outreach methods. How can we lead our institutions to change these? James Baldwin says, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. When we disagree on policy changes or actions, we must keep in mind and ask the team to ask these hard questions and share in the brave space. Never shall we compromise on the fact that all must have the right to not be oppressed or denied their humanity. How are we bringing all voices to the table to have these hard discussions? Elizabeth Kleinrock says that the ABAR is a lens that must be applied to school policies, curriculum, pedagogy, and interpersonal relationships. So this ABAR work is the only lens now through which we must look as we dive deeply into our policies and procedures, our strategic plans in our institutions. Elizabeth Kleinrock, she was the 2018 Teaching Tolerance Award winner, and she said in Teaching Tolerance magazine, school leaders have immense powers in creating a culture that values and supports ABAR. She says, I have often heard from hesitant principals and administrators that their concerned staff members of the community are resistant and unwilling. She says, I'd like to ask them to remember this phrase: what you permit, you promote. Every choice we make either upholds white supremacy or seeks to dismantle it. Change. Dr. Derek Gay is an internationally recognized expert on diversity inclusion. There are many YouTubes with him, many interviews with him, and I have all the resources at the end to hopefully keep you focused on the beginnings of this work for your institution and for yourselves. But this is a little clip about change, and I thought it was important because change is never easy, but today's the day, now is the time.
Change does not necessarily suggest that we're somehow undermining who we have been. I think that change is inevitable. And I often speak to schools about the mission statement, the vision statement. But the mission statement really is an articulation of who we are and our goals. And it informs and it intersects and undergirds everything that we do. The vision statement is then looking at our mission and recognizing that there are other considerations. There are fiscal considerations. There are considerations around, the social environment. There are considerations around what's important now, and iterating that mission in a way that's going to be relevant and meaningful to the challenges that we need to address today. So we look at, we talk about 21st century learning as if we aren't 15 years into the 21st century, but that we have morphed our learning goals and our strategies in a way that addresses the needs of 21st century citizens. And in doing so, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We've kept what has been effective, and we have implemented strategies that align with our mission and who we are. So I don't see change as, I think the fear of change is it's somehow going to, it's going to change the very core of who we are. And I see change more of how do we better realize our mission.
Excellent. Well, that's a wonderful place to end. I think very profound statement. And thank you again, Derek, for your time this afternoon. And it's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
As leaders, Mary Pender Green says that we must be prepared. We must be in this place of not having unrealistic expectations. This is not going to be comfortable. She says this is not going to be a harmonious atmosphere all the time. When you bring diverse voices and you're exploring these certain truths and biases around the human condition, there's a certain degree of discord, she says, that must be expected. There's going to be confusion. We anticipate that there will be a desire to let this anti-racist conversation fade, Mary says, into the background. But disagreement is freedom's privilege. We must develop a higher organizational pain threshold in order to stay the course. Be the leader your institution needs. What are you going to do? I hope everything that you can. Where do we start? We start with ourselves. Here are 3 ideas. You create your own identity map. Start journaling. Like there are a number of books that are out there. There's a guide for even young adults that works great for adults. I've done the whole Tiffany Jewell book. This book is anti-racist, and in it there's a piece of how do I map my own identity? How do I figure out what my lens is? Journal about microaggressions that you see in your day-to-day. Reflect on what you have to contribute. in the process of removing obstacles out of your organization. So begin there. And then begin looking at the school board. When you look at your institution, who sits at the table at your school? Why? How can you begin to make the table larger and without obstacles to anyone? What is required of you to share the work of the school boards with people of color who are marginalized? List the immediate steps and the longer term steps that will be action for equity. Sit down, do that today, begin today. If you're a head of school, as the head of school, who holds the power in your role each day at school? Reflect, observe, review the wording and the practices of the application process. Make sure that it includes clear language that states that your institution will uphold ABAR practice in all areas. And then make sure the action matches the words. And finally, how does community and family outreach in your work reach people of color, of all members of the community? Thank you all for joining me for this workshop of beginnings. In the brave spaces that we must remain in forever. My hope is that you will have the resources now to begin this grand and essential work, leading and creating equity and anti-biased and anti-racist cultures from the roots up in your schools. All of the resources that I have used are going to be included and easy for you to download and then investigate. I wish you well and much success in this big work.